focused kind of on defense, but you think of how long a career person in defense spends away from work in order to undergo the necessary training and education, and then you add another requirement on top of that. Do you risk losing effectiveness? I know there's gains, but is there a risk as well?
Well, there are lots of risks, and there is the question of how many people need to be trained on interagency assignments. This was actually the same issue that we faced when we were doing Goldwater Nichols. You know, I remember every branch of every service used to come up and they say, I remember the armor branch coming up and saying, this is how we've grown a tanker for 50 years. And there is no time for them to go off to do a joint duty assignment. And so this will not necessarily be easily done. But one of the assumptions we made in the past is that people did not have to be trained or educated to go off to interagency assignments. Just like we had the assumption before in the Department of Defense, they did not need to be trained or educated for joint assignments. Very few people who went to joint assignments went through any of the joint war colleges. The interagency work is the most complicated work we have to do, and we need to figure out how to prepare people for that, but it will have to be done carefully. We also have this issue of when we think about an interagency personnel system, what demands will we make on military officers to participate in that? And so one of the issue teams that we will have will examine that issue. You know, the Department of Defense has said they would like to play on that. So lots of things to be considered here. But in my view, as we go forward with the complexity we have, with the need to work across departments and agencies, we'll have to figure out a way going forward. You know, in defense, we had the idea it just needed to be a small cadre of people who were trained in joint. But, you know, joint has gone lower and lower. You know, we have, you know, very small units who are doing joint war fighting, and so it's been pushed lower and lower. But we'll have the same challenges in the interagency. Yes.
Good morning. I wanted to thank you very much for your significant contribution to American defense and security and theory and practice over the last 20 years. It's been awesome.
Well, thank you.
That being said, I'm Dr. Whitten, and I'm a scientist, and I speak the truth to power. That is not very, very well received in this town very often. I'm a graduate of all 4 war colleges. I've done 4 senior fellowships with 4 different federal departments. I spent the last 25 years working with most of the federal departments up and down the Pennsylvania Avenue and up and down the Mall. I spent the last 8 years, or the last 5 years, more specifically working at the Department of Homeland Security, trying to work interagency issues. I happen to also work on the interagency Joint Pub 30-8 interagency support to joint operations, which was based on my after-action report from Mogadishu, Somalia, where we had a chaos of interagency involvement. The thing I would offer to you, very frankly, is this is a daunting task. This is a problem of education. It's a problem of culture. When you have people that come into this community that don't understand political appointees, that don't understand how the community works and then protects the interest of their departments, they do it with a great deal of retribution to those of us that live here and try to make the interagency programs and policies work for the community, not just within the Defense Department, but throughout the community. So, and all it takes, by the way, is one call from the White House or anybody else in this town, and your job's on the line. If you don't have a program to protect those people from being fired capriciously because they speak the truth to power, then you've got problems, sir, with all due respect. Because I've been there and I've done it.
Okay. Well, You know, there is the challenge of political appointees coming into the system. You know, one of the things that we've talked about in our project is capping the number of political appointees. You may know that every year in every administration, the number of political appointees has been growing. You know, when I was in the Pentagon, maybe we had a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense here and there that was a political appointee. Now they're all political appointees. The office directors are political appointees. Some of the principal deputies are political appointees. So there's a little bit of a challenge there, but we've also talked about the need to educate them. You know, we proposed a 3-week program, sort of like a capstone course for incoming presidential appointees. We talked about orientation, mandatory orientation programs. But there's also a need, when we think about this, for the president to say, this is what I'm expecting in terms of collaboration and integrated effort and focus on missions. So we need the president to articulate that, to expect that from his cabinet secretaries and their subordinates and the other political people. So no matter what that bureaucracy thinks, we need from the presidential level a very different mindset.
Jim, I had a quick question, comment and question.
Sure.
Comment is, Jim has obligations right after our session this morning, so we probably have time for 2 or 3 more quick questions. My quick question for you was a legislative type question. Were you referring to a joint select committee or a select committee in each house? And how's the legislative reception going so far to the suggestions?
Well, we were thinking of a committee in each house because eventually, one thing that I've argued with them that I think people have come to recognize is when they did Homeland Security and created the Homeland Security committees, they had robbed jurisdictions from the various standing committees. But what we're proposing here is a jurisdiction that the Congress does not have. It does not have oversight of the interagency space. In part, it had been seen as something that was going to reside only in the executive office of the president, but now it's elsewhere. We have the National Counterterrorism Center, you know, the Strategic Operational Planning Directorate there. There are lots of these things that are growing because the need is there and people can see this. So when we've talked about this idea with the congressional leadership, they can see the need, you know, because we argue that in the future, the really important things in national security are going to be done in that interagency space. They're going to begin to migrate out